When it comes to the church that business built, one of the things we have to talk about is marketing. Because today, more than ever, churches of all sizes are using a marketing playbook, marketing strategies, and they are building marketing machines to funnel people into their ministries. Now, that raises a lot of questions like, is marketing okay to use in the church, or is marketing a bad thing in the church? It asks other questions like, if marketing is okay, when is a good way to use it, and when does it become something that's harmful? But we don't have a lot of these conversations because things like marketing, they feel a little icky. They don't feel like they should be a part of church and ministry, yet the reality is that a part of the church that business has built is marketing machines today are a big, massive part of the church. So that's what we're talking about on today's episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. We're going to break down those questions and more as we talk about the marketing machine in ministry. I think it's going to be a great conversation that you don't want to miss. So if you're ready, let's jump into today's episode. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. I'm here today with Abby Flemming and Shawn Reece. And we got, I think, another cool conversation in this series we've been doing, the church that business built. You know, we've been talking about for weeks now, what happens when business gets into the church in a way that's too much. You know, I do business stuff every day. I'm a business consultant. So I love business, but there's a whole lot of business that doesn't belong in the church. Mm-hmm. And we know that when too much business gets in the church, churches don't wield it as well as businesses. So some things that businesses have learned how to do well, churches tend to never do well. NDAs is one example of that. And of course, we got the NDA documentary that we've released, which was a great look at how NDAs have caused so much damage in the church. Businesses, especially small businesses, tend to use NDAs better. Plus, they're held by laws that are more strict now to make that better. Whereas even when church takes business, stuff like NDAs, when new laws come into place, there are usually religious exemptions, which means there's not as many people looking at us, right? So there's a lot of good that the church can take from business, and I think the church can learn a ton from business, but we've got to be careful not to become businesses, because when we become businesses, we are no longer operating as the church or the best version of who God's called us to be. So today's topic, we're actually talking about the marketing machine in the church. And I say that specifically that way for a reason. Because marketing in the church, we're going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. Marketing in the church is not bad. Yeah. Marketing your church, trying to get the story out about your church, about what your church is about, how they impact the community, that's not bad at all. But marketing generally goes much farther than that in churches. And if we're not careful, especially in bigger churches, mega churches, it can become its own machine that has to be fed. You have to feed that machine to keep going. And it can turn into just some, not only stuff that doesn't look good to people on the outside, but I've even got some stories this week. It can turn into some stuff that becomes deeply damaging to people inside the church. Oh, yeah. So we're going to talk about that. Shawn, one of the reasons why I asked you to join us today is because you have been a marketing director inside of mega churches.
Yes. So there's so much to unpack in that, and you're going to actually probably have to keep me in check because you know me, I will just start talking about marketing.
We'll be talking about email funnels and how to start.
Oh my gosh, you'll know how to do it, so you'll be able to start your own business. No,
notice he said business, not church.
Business, don't start your own church with marketing funnels. Although there are places for that. But yeah, I've kind of wrestled with marketing in the church for years. Like when I first started doing it, it was something, and I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. And I just wanted to do it. And I, bringing people in.
I got to tell people about our church, get more people in the door.
Right. And then I dove deeper into it, and I found myself, I didn't do anything shady. Let's be clear on that. I wasn't,
That's what they all say.
I was trying not to do anything shady.
That's a part of the spiritual abuser's playbook. I didn't do anything shady.
I didn't do that.
I don't think you did.
You saw all the stuff I did, but, most of it. Anyways, but I look back sometimes and I think, was that really beneficial? And not even that, I've even felt guilt over bringing people into church systems that treated them poorly sometimes. And even though I tried to combat that kind of stuff, you can't always do that. So,
Yeah. Well, so you kind of been the head of marketing in a top 100 mega church. You've been the head of marketing in other, like what I would call mid-range large churches. So they're in that 1,000 to 2,000 type range. Yeah. You've done this at smaller churches. Now you actually operate, kind of your own business where you help churches kind of in a 1099 contract role. And part of the reason why you do that is because you can decide which churches you want to work with. Yes. You can decide when you want to stop a project. You can decide, hey, if this feels like it's going in the wrong direction, then I can pause that. I can stop that. You can speak into that differently than if your paycheck is reliant on that one church. So if you correct them, then you're in a bad place. Yeah. But you've done this all over, and everywhere you've been, you've done a fantastic job with marketing. So whether you run a church or if you're involved in leadership in a business or a business owner, if you need help with anything marketing, anything digital, anything telling your story, Shawn's your guy. That's not a promo. He didn't pay for that, but it's just one of those things of I tell as a business consultant when I'm working with people all the time, I've got tons of clients who work with Shawn now.
Yeah, that's great.
Now, so you're great at that, right?
Love it.
At the same time, you've looked back and you've seen things and said, I think that was misused. That's not how I meant that to be used.
Oh, for sure.
Right? So it brought you in because you got a lot of experience in this issue. You and I see this. We probably land on two separate sides of the issue, but I'm just a little bit center left on it probably, and you're a little bit center right on it. That's not like political terms. I'm just picking a side. There's two sides that, you can switch that. You can be left and I'll be right. And then Abby, this is just one that you're kind of passionate about. Yeah. You've seen it. I think you've probably seen some good come from it, but you've also seen enough to say, whoa, there's some red flags here. Let's be careful. Yeah. So when you think about church marketing.
Well, I love marketing, and I've done marketing and dreamed up. My husband has started multiple businesses. So we've even dreamed up businesses that have never launched, but we've put together marketing and all that stuff. So I'm not professional, but I do have that mind and that working and that psychology.
If you've been paid by your husband's businesses, then you're professional.
Right.
Yeah. If he hasn't paid you, say, pay me. So I'm going to become a marketing professional.
Right. Yeah. But no, so I come at it from a perspective of small business and that things are necessary. But also as just a general person that goes to church and that has been affected, that has seen marketing and choose a church for this marketing or that marketing and go in and experience some things that have, in my opinion, could be very hurtful and damaging to somebody that's coming in to church that didn't grow up in church,
Yeah, and we got to be careful how we tell the story, because every time we market our church, we're telling the story we want people to see, the story we want people to hear, but we're also telling them inadvertent stories that we didn't mean to tell, because people are reading between the lines, they're looking at these things. So every time you see like a church post on Instagram, for instance, like there may be the story this church wants to tell, which is our worship is awesome. You can meet with God here. Picture of someone worshiping, crying their eyes out. Oh my gosh, life change, right?
Yeah.
But that also lets someone know in the story, as they're looking at the background, the picture and everything else, they notice there's lights and haze. So you're also telling the story, we're one of those churches, for good or bad. And again, some people like that, some people don't, but that's a story you didn't necessarily mean to tell. You told a story about programming and entertainment matter to us, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So a lot of churches will say environment matters to us, but I would say, okay, church environments lasted for a long time, like smoking lights. I don't have a problem with smoking lights, but that is an entertainment part. It's not an environment part, right? Yeah. So you've communicated that to people. Some people are going to say, I don't want a part of that. Others are going to go, oh, cool show, and this great worship, right? But there may be other things going on inside of that image, right? And I don't want to get into all those, what that could be. Shawn, you'd probably be better at telling those, but there can be other stories that are being told. What about when you see the person who's looks like they're just going after Jesus and worship, incredible story, right? But then you see, and we won't answer this now, we'll come back to it in a minute, but then you also notice, wait a second, I know that person. they don't even go to that church. They were hurt by that church.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
wait a second, I know that person. They used to be on staff at that church. They got fired by that church a year ago, and my friend had to move. What the heck is why are they in your marketing? Now you're telling a different story because you're using people to say, look, we go after Jesus. Oh, by the way, the ministry bus just ran over that person, backed up, ran over him again, backed up. We did that a few times and sent them packing, but we still use them in our marketing material, right? So that's one of those things that can happen when you do marketing and you post the video on social media, or you have it as a part of, a promo you're running or a billboard of our church serves the community and we're doing some sort of relief effort in the community. It does tell people, yes, we serve the community. What it also tells people is we take cameras when we serve the community.
Yes.
So the question is, am I doing this because is this church doing this because they care about the community? Or is this church doing this because they like the photo op? Because a lot of churches were doing it during this relief thing. So I actually talked to a guy yesterday, and he said, hey, I was involved in a hurricane a few years ago. This really big church in the area came through, had all these trucks, all these volunteers dropping off water, dropping off stuff after the hurricane. I came out and I thought, oh, that is pretty cool. And he said, all our neighbors were coming out. We were all like, that's pretty cool. And then we heard some noise and we turned around and we looked, and there's multiple photographers with the shutter going, taking thousands of pictures at a time. He goes, 4 or 5 would have probably been enough. They're just laying on that thing. You hear the click, 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 right?
Yep.
And he goes, they're just taking pictures everywhere. And he said, and that's when I realized they were serving us to use us in their promo material. He said, but then I thought maybe I'm just being cynical, because he actually went to the church, right? Maybe I'm just being cynical. I got to trust my pastors and stuff. He said, and then I got there, and there we were, Sunday in the promo, and I felt used.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times, I've even been a part of that, because you think like, hey, this is a dual opportunity. We're going to help them and we're going to get something out of it. But it so often in church marketing, even unintentionally, it becomes more about what can we get out of this. I've been a part of conversations, and this is where I started getting disillusioned with it a bit, is being a part of conversations with the main focus is what can we get out of it. When we're going to do this campaign, what's our return on investment? And that,
is that the words?
That's the words. That's words that were used, and I use those words at times too. So the way I see it, I saw my role as marketing director is I saw things in the business light so other people didn't have to, and I don't think that's a bad place to be, because you want to be a good steward of the finances that you're given. You want to really reach people, and so sometimes you have to look at those things.
Providing that most people aren't making decisions based off that. But if too many people are making decisions based off that, because I talk about with businesses return on investment all the time, because I have to tell them, you're a business. Even if you're a Christian-owned business, you're a business. You're in business to make money, and if you don't make money, you're not helping anybody. Right? But a church is a not-for-profit. You're not in the business of making money. You're in the business of helping people, and you just need to make sure you keep the lights on in the process.
And so a lot of times when it comes to that, the return on investment thing, you would think they're talking like, oh, how many people could get saved from this? How many people can get baptized? How many people can bring in? And that's fine.
But is the money we're spending worth it? Is it going to translate to transformation is what I would hope it would be.
One of the things that really, I think the breaking point for me was when it came down to this is how much on average each person is worth in each seat. This is how much tithe money on average people are going to bring in. So if we do this thing, is we're going to spend this much money, but we'll bring in this much tithe money. Yeah. And that's right there. That's where it broke down.
If we bring in 400 people on average attendance from this event, each seat represents dollar amount per week, which means this is what we'd make. This is what we're spending to bring them in. How long does it take us to break even after we've spent this? Can we break even in 2 months? What if these people stay for 12 months? How much money will we make? Now, you and I have not talked about this. This particular story we've not talked about. So I just filled in a lot of gaps. Did I fill them in right, or did I fill them in wrong?
That was correct. And so,
just for kicks and giggles, before we go any farther, I filled those gaps in completely right. You and I have never talked about this.
Never.
Like that. Honestly, it's the first time you told me that. I wasn't in those rooms. Wasn't a part of that.
Yeah.
Right? How do I know? As a church consultant, I hear that all the time. more pastors than you would think. Not all pastors, but more pastors than you would think talk about things like how much money every seat is worth to the cent, right?
Oh yeah.
And this is a trend right now, okay? And if you're doing this, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I am trying to challenge you to change, okay? But the thing I'm hearing right now is they're talking about people as giving units.
Yeah.
They're not talking about it people.
Yeah.
They're not talking about them by name. They're not talking about them as parishioners. They're talking about them as people that God gives us. They'll actually be giving a report, and you'll hear pastors and executives saying, and I'm not saying executives, that's what they call themselves, right? You'll have pastors and executive members, executive teams, executive pastors, whatever, and they'll be talking about, oh yeah, in the last quarter, we added 300 giving units. And each giving unit is worth an average of $17.33 a week, and which is a ridiculous number, right?
Yeah.
But that's how when I hear any of those, I literally have to recuse myself. I was doing a consulting trip not too long ago, and I told my partner, because we go 2 by 2. I told my partner in that trip, I said, "Hey, I think they're about to start talking about things I don't need to hear about."
Yeah.
Because I will respond in an inappropriate way. I will make this company that I'm contracting with, because not only am I a consultant, I work with other consulting companies, I'll make us look bad because I can't not say something, and I can't not report on this if I hear it. So I recuse myself when I hear certain things, right? And that's become one of those things. We start talking about giving units and what the chair's worth and what the person's worth, but we don't say what the person's worth because that sounds bad. So we say we've added giving units, and each giving unit is worth this. So if we've added 400, but if or we've added 300, and if in this upcoming quarter, we could add 500, then our projections for next year's budget was, we could be X million above where we were. When we start having those conversations, we've lost the heart of Jesus.
100%.
And we're putting monetary value on people. We're doing it for monetary means, even if we're also doing it for good means. So I thought it was important for us to stop there. You've been in the rooms where it's happened.
Yeah.
I just hear people using this language after they've come out of the room.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not every church. It may not be your church, but regardless of whether it's your church or not, it's more churches than you think. So we're not tearing down churches, but it's why we have to have this conversation.
And I would say that I know a lot of communications directors, marketing directors, whatever you want to call them. A lot of people will call them communications pastors because marketing director or marketing pastor sounds too abrasive.
And we feel like we have to put pastor on every title.
And marketing's not a bad word, but a lot of people in the church, even people who go to the church and outside the church, do view it as bad because marketing has been associated with so much manipulation, and it really can be super manipulative. But a lot of them that I know, that's not their heart. That's not what they want. They're not the ones who see them as giving units. They're not the one who said. Now there are going to be some. There's
always bad apples in every bushel.
But by and large, most of the people in that position that I know, the communications, they don't really have a ton of control over that aspect. They're like, hey, your job is to get butts in seats.
Most of them are storytellers who want to help grow their church and reach people.
Yes.
Now, sometimes the downside to that is if you have really hyper creative storytellers in those roles, sometimes the story can become God.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Does it matter if we manipulate some things, if we change some things because we want to tell the best story, and this story is to honor God? And it's kind of like, when you go watch a movie and it's like, this is based on a true story. How loosely is this based on a true story? Because we're changing things for the sake of the movie, right? Yeah. So I've seen that happen with people's stories in church. I've also seen people's stories leveraged who weren't in a place who were ready to be on screen. Because being on screen came with some attention and stuff they didn't need, and it actually caused them to kind of relapse back into the bad part of their story. Yeah. Yet no one noticed that. But it was as soon as we hear the story, we want to use the story. 6 months later, they're not even in that church, and nobody knows what's going on.
And nobody cares. Like the people who use that story usually don't care.
And it doesn't mean that nobody cares, but the people who use the story don't care because there's a lot of people in the sea, right? But even with that, I haven't met, and I know there's some bad actors out there, okay? I've never met any communications pastors, marketing directors, but I've never met any senior pastors that start using marketing with bad motives. They don't start out talking about giving units. They don't start out talking about the bottom line. They don't start out talking about ROI. They don't start out looking for stories we can leverage. And why do we tell these stories? Because every time I tell a story, then you want to give to the story. Yeah. We know that people want to give to the story, right?
Yeah.
So, but we start out using those things for good reasons, and there's no problem with telling stories of good things that are happening in your church. What becomes dangerous is there is a very slow fade, and it's hard to figure out when we stopped doing it for the right motives.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you've went from, I just want to tell stories so that people can celebrate what God is doing in our church, to now all of a sudden you're telling stories to raise giving, because you know you're calling people giving units, you know how much on average they give, and if you could just get them each to give 20% more, then your church could hit this next, financial milestone.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes an issue, because anytime we start calling people anything other than people, even in business type meetings, there's a reason we're doing that.
Yeah.
Because we have to in our brains at that point. Something's happened to where we don't feel right about it if we call them people. So let's stop talking about people's giving units. Okay, that's that's
number
not
one.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Church Disrupted community, if you've experienced religious trauma, church hurt, or spiritual abuse, and you want to heal and let go of your triggers and hurt, then we want to help. The Forgiveness Link and the East Tennessee Mentorship Association are two partners of the podcast that exist to help you leave your trauma behind and start living your best life. Church hurt and spiritual abuse don't have to hold you back anymore. Rob and the Forgiveness Link team will help you leave your trauma behind and experience massive healing in as little as 8 weeks. Their intensive process, it's faith-based, practical, and extremely powerful. I've experienced firsthand the transformative power of the Forgiveness Link process, and I would love to see you experience it as well. Dustin Stitt and the East Tennessee Mentorship team, they'll help you find healing from a different approach. This veteran-owned business is faith-informed and will walk through the healing journey at your own pace with you. From groups to individual sessions, they'll help you continue to take consistent steps forward toward the person that you want to be and the life that you want to live. Both partners can help you transform your life, and we believe in both of them. One is more clinical and delivers fast-paced results, and the other is more relational and works at the pace that you commit to. But please, 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 please don't stay hurting on your own. Your church hurt experiences, they don't have to define you, and they don't have to hold you back any longer. If you're ready to step into healing and leave your trauma behind, please reach out to one of our partners. You can find out more information about them in the description below or at disruptedchurch.church on the Partners tab. You can meet with either of our partners at no cost just to hear how they'll work with you, and also they'll let you know about special rates they have just for Church Disrupted community members. But regardless of which of these two partners you choose to work with, you'll be in good hands. And I can't wait to hear how your life has changed for the good, for the better, because you work with them.
So there's just, there's a lot to unpack in all that stuff, because, those kind of moments were breaking for me. And that's kind of what led me to, do I even want, you may have had this conversation. Should I even continue helping churches market? Because
we've had that conversation in fairly recent months.
Yeah. And, I've been dealing with that myself, like the guilt and stuff, because, I saw systems in the church that were hurting people. Mm-hmm. And I saw,
and not just one church. You're not picking on one church.
No.
You've seen this pattern.
Yeah. In churches that I've been on staff at, in churches I've just helped, in friends that I've talked to who are pastoral staff that are just going through, I've seen these things. And it's not even one church that I've even been to. It's a pattern. And you'll see things like, hey, this you've got an issue here. At about 3 or 4 years in, people are volunteering, and that's about when they leave. So you have your back door that's as big as your front door. You're bringing in people, but people are leaving, and you're not really growing. You're just staying steady, which can only last for so long. Before
Yep. And usually that's happening because there's there's a cycle and a process people go through. And on the Church That Business Built episode, not just the series, but the episode I did with the interview I did with Ken Arrington, he talked about that. And he said there's a cycle that usually lasts somewhere between 3 and 4 years, that when someone is fully involved and goes through the cycle, that they start to see how the sausage is made, they see something's wrong, and there's nowhere else for them to go. There's no higher level for them to go, and that's when they disengage. And what he said, which I thought was really cool, was he said the more mature a believer is, the faster they see it.
Yeah.
And he said that is why a lot of churches brand themselves. And I know this isn't the only reason why churches do this. I'm having to think through this. Like the week we're recording this, right? I don't know what's going to happen when it releases. But the week we're recording this, one of our social media accounts went from like 400 followers to 1,500 followers. It was our smallest social media account because we got some, almost 50,000, right?
Yeah.
But it happened because of a couple of videos overnight, which means anytime we're growing, the trolls come out.
Yeah.
So and some of the worst trolls, the people who hammer us and cuss at us the most, are people with pastor in their bio because they get mad about this stuff, and people who think we're talking about their church. So all of these things I keep saying is because I want people to know we're not talking about every church.
No.
We're not talking about just your church, right? But he said a lot of these seeker-sensitive churches, they label themselves that way because they need people who either have barely been Christians or weren't Christians, because when they don't know anything really about Christianity and how church works, the less they know, the longer they stay. And that's the more serving we can get out of them. The more years of serving we can get out of them, the more time, the more of them inviting their friends, the more of them giving, because they have to do, if you don't give at least 10%, you can't serve in most of these churches. That's something we don't talk about a lot. But if you're not giving, you can't serve. Not only that, it has become the thing lately. If you're not giving, you can't meet with the senior pastor or the senior leaders to talk about problems you see. And I actually sat down with someone not too long ago. It was a couple who was leaving a church. They tried to talk to the pastor, right? My wife has had similar conversations with other people. We've heard this multiple times. Tried to sit down with the pastor, and he refused to meet with them because he pulled their tithing record and they weren't giving enough.
Oh, yeah.
After years of giving enough, they had kind of stopped because they were seeing some issues, and then they couldn't talk to the pastor, right? So you got somebody giving so they can serve. You got them giving man hours. You got them inviting friends. You got them doing all this. Well, the less they know and the longer it takes them to see what's going on in the systems, then the longer they stay before they walk out that back door you're talking about. And then hopefully the hope is, and I'm talking about from a pure system standpoint. And again, I do a lot of work where I hear pastors talk about this from a pure system standpoint. When you have a pastor who's doing that and a leadership team that's doing that, they're basically saying, are we bringing in enough people? If a person stays for 3 years, then are we bringing in enough people that we've still grown when that group leaves?
Yeah, which is not fixing the issue. It's just, it's a Band-Aid. And there's only so many people in your area that are going to go to your church.
That's why the majority of these churches plant in large cities. Because what they think is we'll never run out of people. Although there are some that have and some that are starting to run out of people, because eventually everybody's either been to your church, heard about your church, or they've not been to your church, but they've formed an opinion about your church, because that stuff starts getting out, versus the church that Jesus died for was one that didn't have a back door. He talked about, hey, how blessed is a person who can restore their brother from sin, right? So I think the marketing piece and the growth piece, it makes us feel okay with letting the back door be wide open when it used to bother us when anyone walked through the back door.
And,
the problem I'm having hearing all of this is that the purpose of church is lost when you even start having these conversations, because this is real. Churches need to make money, and not make money, but churches have bills.
They have to have money.
I know churches that are large that their building is falling apart because people are not giving, and because they have too much debt or bad decisions or whatever the case is. So I don't disagree with churches needing finances, because it is a need. They've got to be operational. But when the purpose of everything is lost and you're just talking about, well, we need this many people to come in because this many people might be going out. That conversation, period. I mean, that it's a needed conversation if it's happening in the church, but the conversation doesn't need to be, well, ooh, that's hurting my bottom line. How do I get the money back in? It should be, why are people leaving?
Yes.
And what can we do? And my thing is, marketing doesn't just happen to get people in the door. Marketing happens to keep people there. And so maybe a lot of the conversation needs to be shifted to, what are we doing marketing wise while people are here? Where are we maybe not? Marketing is communication. It's communicating needs.
Yep.
We have a need. I need to tell you what our need is and tell you why you should help me. I mean, that's in general, right?
And I would say, and I think that's why this conversation is so important, right? Because it does feel icky. And I've got people who say, Jeff, all y'all do is have conversations bad about the church. First of all, that's not true. That lets me know someone's not listening to the podcast, because I'm like, well, what about this video? What about this video? What about this short? What about that? But they say, you guys just, you talk about these things. You're just talking about bad stuff with the church. You're not talking about, good stuff with the church and everything else. Well, and there's a reason for that. We do. Well, first of all, it's not true. We do talk about good stuff with the church. You and I were on a whole episode. There's nothing but good stuff about the church. Yeah. But at the same time, we're not going to talk about as much good stuff in the church because this podcast wouldn't exist if churches were healthy.
Yeah.
This podcast exists because we're calling the church. We're calling for a reformation where we see people and value people like Jesus does, because that's what the church in the West needs, right?
Yeah.
Which means we're highlighting a lot of things that are going wrong and talk about them. These conversations feel icky. People don't like them. The reason why we're having such icky conversations, though, is because if we don't have them, they will keep happening.
Yeah.
Right? But you talked about, like, I even want to challenge something because, and it's not bad with you, Abby. It's just, it's the way we talk. It's become so commonplace. Hey, it's okay to talk about communicating this need in marketing. We have this need, and let me show you why you should fill this need. Now we've entered into, in just that one small word, right? Guilt has been cast. We have a need, and you should fill it. And if nobody fills it, the need won't be met. And who is most likely to fill that need? When it's shared that way, it's the person that's already serving in two ministries.
Yeah.
It's the person who's already giving a lot of time at the church, and they're going, I don't know if I could give more time, but I love my church and I don't want to see a need not met. They're going to step up first. Versus if you say, here's something we'd like to do. We even feel like it's a need, but we know this. If God wants us to do it, he'll bring us the people. So we want to do this. We feel led to do this, but here's going to be our test. We can only do it if we get 4 volunteers to make this run. So please pray about it. And if anyone here feels God nudging you that we need to do that, consider volunteering. Or if you just feel like God's calling you to be a part of that, consider volunteering. And if we can get 4 volunteers in the next couple of months for this and get them trained, then we'll do this thing. I think that's totally different, because then people can say, I don't feel guilted into doing this, right? And the pastor can say, if you're already serving in multiple areas, this isn't yours unless you feel called away from that area. But we just believe God's bringing his people. And it's one of those things, too, of saying, you know what? Are we going to be disappointed if we don't get to do this? Yes. But at the same time, we know it's God showing us we're not quite ready yet. Right. That's a totally different conversation.
And that's healthy, and that's honest. And it's when we get out of that honesty of marketing and that raw heart, it's when we start putting the pretty words on it and trying to spin it different ways to try to appeal, because marketing is a huge thing today. And on all the different ways people market are, I mean, that's a whole nother issue. But it's when we start doing that in the church, because it's easy now to get that heart response out of people, and it's just common. It's the way we speak to each other now. Marketing, these marketing language has become that, but we've forgotten the heart, and we're not honest. We're just going through the motions. It becomes a system, a machine, all on its own, just even in the language. And so, I just, if I'm looking for a church, and if I've been somebody that's been hurt, and I have been hurt, I've been through many churches. We've tried church planting. We've been hurt by people on both ends, as in the leadership role and as a patron. I forget what you call it. Anyway.
Parishioner.
Yeah, parishioner.
And at the same time, you're still in the church and have a church that you love today.
Yes. Yep. And no matter what, you always see things, right? Yeah. But the thing that I'm looking for when I'm shopping churches as someone that's been hurt, when on the marketing, I'm very critical. And if I see all these perfect people pictures, I'm not sure I really want to go to that church because I'm not a perfect people, and I don't. That just everybody's smiling in the hallways all the time. I mean, you don't want to see people with their heads down. You want to capture the good moments, but I want to hear a heart. I want to know that people are putting testimonies out. Put their testimony out as marketing, because that is marketing. That's Jesus's marketing. He says that we'll know him, and he talks about by the power of our testimony. We should be sharing that. Churches need to give people a chance to share their testimony through marketing. That's going to get a lot of the results that they want.
Because people aren't going to twist their stories.
Yeah.
And now the danger with that, though, and Shawn, you know this, and there's a couple of things you talked about that I want to come back and hit on, but I'll say this really quick. The danger of that is that when you let people tell their own stories authentically, you can't control how they say it. So one, they might say something that makes you bristle because it's not cleaned up. And two, they might say something that makes God look good, but doesn't make our church look as good as we want. So we like to vet those stories. And even when we do let people tell the stories, we coach them through how to do it and we clip it. So we cut out all the stuff, and you get 10% of their story. Now, I think this is important too. We talk about, so there's two things I want to hit on that you talked about. One, we're still talking about that need piece. I think it is okay because I've also been I've been a part of churches where they went through phases. It never lasts, but they go through phases where they say, "Well, because of marketing language, we're never going to share. We need you. We're going to share. We have an opportunity for you, and we don't want you to miss the opportunity." That is more manipulative than telling them you need them.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's also nothing wrong with telling people that you have a need. Now, on the volunteer thing, I don't think you ever say we have a need. I think you can say, if it's for something in the community, there is a need. And we think we could fill that as a church, but we need volunteers to fit it. Because now you're not saying, it's not about us. There's a need in the community. That's different, right? I also think it's fine if you say, hey, guys, this building's pretty awesome, isn't it? We had to pay an $8,000 repair bill on our big HVAC, because it's big commercial HVAC this week. And we had to do that a couple of months ago. As we talked to the repair guys, they said, hey, you're going to have to keep spending these huge bills until this fails. And then nobody in this building is going to have this stuff. It takes months to get it in because it's specialty equipment. And they recommended that even though it's scary, it's time for us to go ahead and replace our HVAC units across this whole commercial building. And that's going to be about $100,000. And guys, that scares us. But we also want to make sure that we can always do ministry and people are comfortable and safe here. So we wanted to let you know about that need. We are praying that these HVAC units hold together, and we will just continue to pay the repair bills as they come until we have the money to replace them cash. And we won't try to pursue a loan or anything until they break. So, if there's a few weeks we sweat in here because of that, you'll know why. So if you want to give to that need, our preference would be to do this in front, no debt. But we can't do that without extra giving. If you would like to give to that need, please consider it, right? That's okay to say.
Absolutely.
We need some people to step up and give. Not we need you, because every you hearing that may not need to give to that, right? But I think it's important that we say it's okay for churches to share needs, but especially around volunteering inside the church, we don't need you, right?
Yeah.
Even for giving scholarships and stuff like that. When I was a student pastor, sometimes I'd say that we need you to help us take these kids to camp. No, we have some kids who would like to go to camp, and we would love the opportunity to give them a scholarship. We don't have that right now. If you want to be a part of providing that, you feel led to do that, do that. And if not, it'll be okay. But it's coming back to this faith, and we probably wouldn't say this on stage, but it's coming back to this faith that God's going to find a way to get the kid there who needs to be there.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have to manipulate to do it. Last thing I wanted to say on what you were talking about, Abby, and then from there we can just go, because I know Shawn's got some stuff, so we can just go wherever. But I think this is hugely important. You talked about you don't trust churches, that when you're like church shopping or you're looking at their marketing, which I hate that term, church shopping anyway, but there's no other way to
It's
church
true.
trying.
It's just true.
Yeah. But you're looking at their marketing and saying, hey, are they just showing all like shiny, happy, perfect people? one of the things that I'm looking for, and man, this will make you feel icky when you start looking at churches after this, okay? Are there real representative samples of the population you live in on social media? So I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be a little brutal here. Some people are probably going to get mad, okay? I live in East Tennessee. In East Tennessee, a lot of adults are overweight. Obesity is a problem, okay? I'm not going to stand right now because I'll knock over some cameras and stuff like that, but obesity is a problem, okay? I got some work to do. So I consider myself a bit of a fat human, okay? So I'm not yelling at anybody else. But if there's never any larger obese people in full frame shots in your marketing, that's a problem. If there's only a couple of colors of people and it's not representative like of your actual community in the pictures, something's wrong. And that goes both ways. We're not showing everybody in our community, or our community. I've seen churches where their community is like 95% white. I don't know how a community is 95% white, but I've been in some of them, so I get it. If your community is 95% white, but you're showing like a fourth of your pictures is a black person, you're kind of trying to tell a story that's not there.
You're trying to force it. I mean, I've been in churches where they are like, we need more diversity on stage. That's the nice way they put it. We have to have diversity on stage, otherwise we can't get those kind of people in here. Which is like that whole kind of
phrase.
Even the way to say that,
I hate that. Those kind of people.
Yeah,
and that's
100%.
Talked about a bunch of. We're not talking about like one particular type or group of people.
Any type.
Yeah. But you're literally saying, who are we putting on stage? I've seen churches do that. Who are we putting on stage this weekend? Well, we've got to ask someone who fits this mold, someone who fits this mold, someone who fits this mold, or we won't look diverse, yet their community may not be diverse.
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact that they want to be diverse, but don't tell a false story. Here's the other thing, though. Man, I mean, again, we live in East Tennessee. There's a lot of people who come from pretty addictive past. And one of the ways you know that people have been in a lot of drug addiction here, there's a lot of meth around here, they're teeth issues. Do you ever see someone who you look at and you go, yeah, they've seriously done some meth in their past in the pictures because they're in our churches, right? Fantastic, great people, right? And I'm not judging them when I see them, but I'm just saying, like, and I'm throwing out some things that we would just notice really easily, right? But this could be gender, it could be everything else, but are we showing real people from our communities, or are we only showing people who fit a certain mold? And for lack of a better way of saying it, for some churches, the only thing that they're ever showing are pretty people.
That happens a lot.
It's whatever their version of pretty people is, right? Sometimes it's age-wise. Your church has a lot of different ages in it, but we only show people in their 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. So it's not just even about perfect people looking like they're doing perfect things. It could be someone, again, breaking down, crying, struggling.
Right.
But again, they only fit the mold of pretty people. So look at it. When churches are doing their marketing, does it look similar to what I see when I go to Target, when I go to Walmart, when I go to the mall, when I go wherever? I was going to just say Walmart, but if you just go off Walmart, that might not be the way to go.
Diversity.
Right.
Well, on that kind of stuff, when it comes to marketing, another thing to look for when you're looking at churches, look at their if they have a kids ministry social media page, if they have a youth ministry social page. Oftentimes, even in the biggest church, so the large church that I was the marketing director at, one of the top 100 at the time, their kids page and their student page I was not in charge of. I was in charge of one of the student pages. What would you say, dude? I'm just kidding. But that's going to give you a more accurate picture, because most of the time those aren't made by marketers, and they're not people
who don't know how to tell the story. I'm snapping a picture with my phone. That's
exactly. It's the most realistic thing you're probably ever going to see, and so that will give you a better picture of who that church is.
Well, I would get coaching from different people. I got it from you a couple of times, but I would get it from different people, and it's like, dude, why did you post that angle? Why'd you put that was grainy? Why'd you? And I'm like, I just took out my cell phone.
I'll tell you if it looks terrible, but you'll get a good picture of if they are diverse, if they are
exactly
if they are who they say they are. It's not student pastors aren't going to take pictures of only the pretty people most of the time. Now, there are some churches that will do that.
Yeah.
But kids pastors and stuff, I mean, it's
because they don't have full teams. So you just got people who are doing this. It's usually younger people anyway.
a lot of times they have volunteers running it who don't know anything about it. They're just going to take pictures of, hey, that looks cool.
And a lot of the pictures taken worship, and it's dark, and I don't know how to take a good picture in the dark, this is funny, but a church is real when you've got anybody on pastoral ministry who's done like a live stream or they've done a post where they've got the under chin angle, right? And you look at that and you're like, dude, do you not know better? At the same time, you're like, that dude's real, and he doesn't care.
Although I have coached many campus pastors and pastors to not do that.
You coached me.
Yeah, don't do that.
You coached me, and you're like, dude, that made you look super fat. And I'm like, oh, it did. Darn.
Like, I want you to look as good as you can.
Now,
as
to
a
be
church,
fair,
but
again, there's nothing wrong with getting better. I ask you with all this, like you coach me on angles and setting up cameras and stuff like that, so there's nothing wrong with that, but there's always a line we got to be careful of, right? And I actually think churches would do better if we focused on not trying to make it look so good and we made it look real, because real people will see themselves in it and say, I belong at that church. When you look at social media right now, the trend is actually that the social media that is taking off the most it leans more real than polished. Doesn't mean it looks bad, right? But it leans more real than polished. The most polished stuff, you go back like 5-6 years ago, Instagram was all about the most polished, perfect stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of changed. And it's been forced to change by things like TikTok, right? Where it's non-polished, I did this thing, and now you're a real person.
Well, you've got a generation coming up who doesn't care about that. They want to see the real. Gen Z and even millennials are more like that in a lot of ways. But millennials and especially Gen Z, they don't want the polished because they know it's not real. They've seen their parents, they've seen their grandparents, whatever, do the polished thing. They've seen them do this whole life is perfect. This is what your life needs to be like. And knowing that person's life is a giant dumpster fire and they don't want any part of it. And so they want the real.
They want the real.
They want the real. I don't know if that's the thing
they want the REAL. They want the real.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. I was trying to be cute, and you didn't even.
I didn't get it. No.
Yep. That's what I get. But again, I'm a middle-aged white guy with a gray beard and a receding hairline. Okay, so is your church representing people like me? Actually, you don't have to represent people like me because middle-aged white guys are in every community. So represent everybody else. We get it, right?
You're good.
But if it's just the 20 and 30-year-olds, then hey, there's something going on there. Right?
Most marketing directors, when it comes to social media, when you see churches doing stuff like that, they're going to focus on. So this is what we used to call the Mike Haas. You have a target person. Like, you don't have a target. You do have a target audience. Let's not get too deep into that. But you build out specific people. This person is 35 years old, white male. He makes $100,000 a year.
It's an avatar.
Yeah. So you make this out. This person has a wife and 3 kids, and so you build out your perfect family, and that's who you're going to target. So you're going to get pictures, you're going to get images, you're going to get videos, you're going to get testimonies of that person because that's who you want to bring in. Now, as a marketing person, I advocate for doing stuff like that when it comes to certain things. But when it comes to churches, I've always said churches are so broad. You want to reach everybody. You can't reach everybody. So you're going to lean one specific way. So you're going to build your experience around this type of person. But
with them in mind, that's not a bad thing.
But it does not mean that you do it to the exclusion of everybody else.
Yeah, when you do it at the expense of other people, then you're in a bad place. So I tell churches like mission, vision, and values and stuff like that, you have a target audience, you're reaching for that bullseye. But if you hit that bullseye, you're also going to hit all the concentric circles around it, right? You just have to have some sort of target.
Yeah.
When we almost don't want people who don't fit that target, then we're becoming overly homogenous. We got a problem. Even like live stuff in churches is part of the marketing machine. When the marketing machine goes deep enough, going back to who's on stage, when it goes deep enough, you don't find any people who aren't pretty or diverse on stage.
Well, I've heard stories of people saying you have to lose weight before you can go on the stage.
I have been in rooms where it's like we're going to have to send them to X or Y campus because we can put them at that campus looking that way, but we can't put them at the broadcast campus looking that way. We can't put them in the campus in this specific community looking that way, right?
Right.
I've also been in meetings where it's, even like, and I hate to say this, but I've been in meetings where it's certain staff members, it's, hey man, you can't put them on stage because they're overweight.
Yeah.
And they can't get on stage. They can't be a host. They can't use the mic until they lose weight.
Yeah.
And that those were moments that woke me up to the marketing machine, because it was like, whoa, that is not okay.
No, it's not.
And again, that doesn't happen everywhere, but it happens more than you would think.
I would say, I've been in conversations like that as well. Probably some of the same rooms you've been in at the same time.
Oh, dude, it always made me so nervous, because I'm like, well, I'm just a little overweight, but where's the line? Where do you draw the line where I'm no longer allowed to be on stage?
Am I going to get fired if I gain 10 pounds?
Am I going to get hooked? And it's like, you're no longer allowed to preach because you got too fat.
Yeah.
Well, where was too fat? We don't know, but you passed it.
But I mean, there is a level of things, like you can't have somebody who can barely read and who can't speak on stage talking to people, because you're not going to get your message
That
across.
is not true. I know some people who can barely read.
You shouldn't do
but they
that.
can memorize.
Memorize, okay, yeah, sure. But if somebody's doesn't have a good presence,
That's
and
why
stuff,
we do interviews in church.
You want to be careful.
Sometimes we do interviews because they are not ready, but we want this particular story or look, right?
But there are ways to build people up. I'm not saying like, hey, you're terrible on stage, you can never do it. It's like, okay, these are some things you need to work. Let's work on it together, and that helps them. It helps get the message across, because if somebody's up there preaching and they can't form 2 sentences, that's not going to help anybody. That's not going to, and that's the thing. But you don't just throw them away like they're worthless.
No, you help them find their giftedness, if that's not their gifting, and if it is their gifting, you help coach
Develop
them. Yeah, because it could just be it's their gifting, and they got deer in the headlight when they got up in front of people.
So all that to say is, there do need to be some parameters of some standards, but I don't think that somebody's weight should determine what they can do. Somebody's hairstyle or what they look like.
Can you do what needs to be done?
Yeah.
You have the gifting to do what needs to be done, and is it at just a proficient level of gifting? Because part of church is we're having to teach people how to use those gifts. So if you never see anyone who flubs, it's because it's professionals.
Yeah.
Right? So when we equip as churches, the role of a pastor is to equip the saints to do the good work in the ministry. Okay? So if everything you see is polished, it's because it's a bunch of professionals, usually professional communicators. I am one, so totally get it, right? My favorite nights in student ministry, the last 6 years I was in student ministry, is what we called student takeovers, where we got students from, all over to deliver the message and do all the stuff, and we did nothing on stage. Sometimes it would be the first time they'd ever spoken, and they'd speak to 500-600 students.
Yeah.
And you just coach them in their gifting. You coach with whatever it was. I loved those days. They were so far from perfect that it hurt in some ways, because I knew we could put on a good show, but it was some of our highest attended favorite services from students, because they saw themselves. They saw people learning how to use their gifting. And it was a reminder for me, let's do this at least a few times a year, because it's not about perfection. It's not about the professionals putting on the best show. It's about equipping the saints to do the good work of ministry.
And if you focus on perfection, then you've lost Jesus. You've missed Jesus in the whole thing. If your standard is you have to look this way, you have to speak this well, you have to be the absolute peak before you can get up on our stage, then you're missing it.
Yeah, because Jesus is perfect, but he didn't come for people who are perfect.
Yeah.
And at churches, one of the things that you hear is, well, we want excellence. We want excellence from the stage because the Lord demands our excellence. And that's the first time I ever heard that. That made sense. Oh, yeah, we do.
It sounded good.
We want great. We want good top. Yeah, we should buy good quality equipment to get the most excellent sound. Yeah, we shouldn't feel bad for spending the money or whatever it is, but and auditions and all that stuff. But then I look at it now on the back end, and after all these church scandals that are coming out, just in our generation, it's just happening. And then you start seeing a pattern, and you start hearing this language being common with manipulators trying to just say, I want this level of things. I don't want real. I just want this level to look a certain way. People are more concerned about the way things look than they are about what the Lord is actually doing and wanting to do.
Yeah. And anytime we become more concerned about the look than the love, there's a problem. About the look than the results. So again, there's every time we've said this, there's nuance to everything we talked about.
Yeah.
There is some good in this, and some of this is needed because we do want to pursue excellence.
You do.
We want
Yes.
to be.
Yeah.
We want every
for it.
person
Want it
who
to be
gets
nice and good.
We want every person who does something and fills a role in the kingdom to do it to the best of their ability, as excellent as they can. But we don't want it to be just a standard of excellence, because
Or
the
else.
best they can may not be very excellent yet, but until they get the reps, they'll never do it. If I didn't have, I'm so grateful for my student pastor who trusted me to preach for the first time as a 16-year-old who hadn't been saved for a year, right? If he hadn't have let me do that, I wouldn't be a professional communicator today.
Yeah.
I wasn't good. I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I had people who gave me those reps. So we can pursue excellence, but God doesn't demand excellence. God demands our heart. Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So when people say God demands our excellence, and a lot of times they don't say it that way because if they've got marketing people, they tell them, hey, say it a different way. But that's
God
how they
deserves.
start.
Yeah.
God deserves our
Yeah.
excellence.
Yeah.
And yes, God deserves the best that we can give him.
Yeah.
He really does. But what God said he wants is our heart. He said, I don't desire sacrifice. I desire mercy. You go back to, you got the two people giving prayers when Jesus is talking about that. And he says, you look out and you got this Pharisee giving, praying. And he says, Lord, I thank you that I'm not like all these other people. I thank you that I'm better, that I pray and I tithe and I do all this, And then you've got this other person, this tax collector who's ostracized, who is doing all these sinful things, who won't even look up as he prays, but just beats his chest. And he's not trying to show anything other than, Lord, I need you.
Yeah.
Lord, I need you. Which one actually honored the Lord? Which one had excellence in the way they came to the Lord? We have very clearly, it's the tax collector who came to the Lord with the right heart, okay? Because there are not many scriptures where God talks about wanting our excellence. Okay. And when God does demand excellence, because he has done it, you look at times with like the temple and the tabernacle and all that, right? When he demands excellence, you got people like, I can't even remember their names right now, super Old Testament names, but like you got the two in the Old Testament where when they started building the, I believe it was the temple, that he gave them special ability to become the best craftsmen around and to teach people to do that. When God demands our excellence, he gives us the ability so the excellence is easy.
Yeah.
Right? But I think God demands the reality of our hearts, authentic hearts, more than excellence. So all of this, there's good to it. All of this, there's bad to it. Let's talk about this. When is marketing at its best in the church? What does marketing look like when it's good and at its best?
So I am advocate. Everything's marketing. I mean, Seth Godin said it. Everything's marketing.
It's got to be true if Seth Godin said it.
It's got to be true, but it really is, because like the preaching is marketing. The way that people treat each other is marketing. The way that your greeters, all of it is, all your advertisements, everything. And so
I would say the difference is the way that people treat each other, the way that you preach, all that. That's authentic marketing.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's inauthentic. Let's tell a different story. The story we want to tell is inauthentic.
So for me, something that I always loved doing, I was able to get around getting in too much trouble for doing stuff like this, but I would always add in an element of marketing that was giving back if I could.
Yeah.
And so there's two sides to this. Like, so I would do two things. Every year I would book Santa, and we would go out in
Real one?
the real one. I'd bring him down from North Pole, rain, everything. No. And we would go in our area. It's like the downtown, and give away free pictures for families with Santa, because those
Did
are
you do that at a children's hospital one year? Or am I
so
trying-
every year. I would also book him to go to the children's hospital, and so we booked him for like 3 or 4 days. We would do the downtown stuff, and that was the marketing piece. So we would print out the pictures with our church name and all this stuff.
Take the cameras.
Take the cameras.
All the disenfranchised children with Santa.
Yeah, do all the things. Give out to their family, and on the picture it printed like our Christmas service times and stuff. So I mean, it was marketing, but it was free still.
It was still good, as long as you're not.
still good.
As long I'm being facetious, but as long as you're not overusing those pictures just to try to say, "Look at what we did."
Yeah.
I think it's good.
And so, but on that every year is we would also have Santa, and we'd still have to pay for his time, but we'd also have him go to the children's hospital, the kids who couldn't come out, and do the same thing. Take the cameras, print out the pictures. Those pictures usually did not have the advertising on it. They were just for their
Just
families.
for the families.
And he would go floor by floor, and they would bring the kids in to see him. And the hospital loved it. I mean, I loved it. The volunteers doing it, like they absolutely loved it, because we were doing something that would really mean something to people, especially in the season. Like these families could not take their kids to the mall for a picture with Santa. And I mean, it seems something so trivial, and it's not.
When Santa comes into your hospital room and takes a picture with a kid in their bed.
Yeah, it means something.
Special.
So if you can give back in some way, that's always huge. Yeah, you can use like these ads and stuff like that, but make sure you're trying to give too. And then, and not for marketing purposes. That's the second part, is something that I've struggled with before I was marketer. You know, when I was a youth pastor and stuff, I always struggled with it when churches would go to, give water away at a race, or when they would go out into the community and do stuff. It was always with like, by the way, here's our church card. By the way, this water bottle has our logo on it. It was always something. And I would, even when I was the youth pastor stuff and I wasn't into marketing, I would have those conversations like, hey, what if we did this for the community? Okay, but what are we going to get out of it? If we spend this much money, are we going to get people in the door?
And if there's not an ROI, more often than not, we're not going to go do the thing to serve the community.
Right.
Because we're only doing things to serve the community when they give back to us. Yeah. That didn't start out with a bad heart, but then it becomes, we've got to keep the ministry machine going. Yeah. The back door is wide open. We know how many people we're losing every month. So if we're not gaining people,
right?
If we're not gaining giving units, every chair is worth $73, you know, the number changes every time.
It went way up that time.
Well, it does, because every church is so different.
Yeah.
Right. You know, but so we're looking at that. We got to be able to get people to do this versus, you know, how much of church history is just the church being the church. You know, when the plague happened, the church were the ones that were out there with dying people, taking the chances, right? Yeah. Now it's kind of like, well, we're not doing that without hazmat suits, really good cameras, and how many giving units are we going to get from this, right?
Yeah. So the question is, can you do that kind of stuff? Can you go fill up gas tanks? Can you change oil in cars and stuff? I go to church who does this once a month, and they do a really good job of it. They don't, you know, they're not like, here's 5,000 business cards that have to be passed out by the end of the day. I mean, they're wearing their T-shirts and stuff because they're all coming together, and that's fine. But it's not, the heart, it really isn't about what can we get out of this. But can you do it? And I challenge churches with this all the time. This is, you can call it grassroots marketing or just whatever. I just suggest it because I like people giving back.
I talk about it with businesses,
but
grassroots marketing.
If you can you go out without any logos, without any business cards, without anything, and just do these things? Because I guarantee you what's going to happen. People are like, why are you doing this? Where are you from? And what brought this on? And
I've got a story for that actually, that I was thinking about. So one of the things that one of the churches had done was say, we're going to go serve this middle school and serve all the teachers, but we need to make sure we have our banner really big and all this stuff, which I could see the heart behind it was not there. And also people are not asking any questions because they have all the answers they need. They see it, it's posted. Right. And it looks, some people might perceive it as inauthentic anyway. Well,
because it is.
Right. It was on this example. But we did we don't do Halloween, but we wanted to serve the community. Mm-hmm. So we're in the middle of the city, and we would do hot dogs. We'd put out tents. We'd do hot dogs and hot chocolate. And it was just us. We'd get whatever church we were part of. We'd pull some friends in to help us. You know, we would pass out 300, 400 hot dogs. Mm-hmm. And it was just us. It was our money, just us, period. And we never wanted to do anything but just love on people and have that connection. And nonstop, people every year would say, "What church are you with? Yeah. Why are you doing this?" Just like you're saying, like,
well, I go to this church, but I'm not with any church right now.
And it's like, and then you'd have the conversation and say, "Well, I go to this church. What, tell me your story. Mm-hmm. What are you looking for? Because this person also goes to this church, and it's quite different than my church." Yeah. And then and those are, when we were doing church planting, they would talk about the marketing, the big events and marketing events, and how most of the times those don't convert anybody to actually attending your church. So what is the purpose? And those little, having one or two people ask you that might actually get those people. It's small, but they're going to be people that do come to the church compared to like throwing on huge events with your banner. And it's not, it isn't putting anybody in the seats, you know?
And you got to be careful too, because at that point, like you said, like you had people constantly asking you. It's really easy to say, hey, we're going to do it this way because we know people are going to ask us. And so that becomes inauthentic in itself. And you'll start seeing a diminished return if you start having that heart too, because people will see and feel your authenticity every time.
Or your inauthenticity.
Yes, or your inauthenticity.
So, I think about if you've ever read the book, A Church Called Tov, right? Scott McKnight wrote it. Tov is really just the Hebrew word for goodness, right? And he's speaking, the whole book is about a goodness culture, a safety culture where we get rid of the spiritual abuse, the scandals, all the things in church. So definitely speaking my language. But one of the things he talked about was like, hey, when we give to the poor, the church is, so much about giving to the poor with the photo op and all that. And he said, and he told a story. So I would butcher it if I tried to tell it. So I'm just going to kind of highlight it. But he told a story really powerfully from someone who'd been on the receiving end of that and just talked about how devalued they felt every time the white people from the suburban church came to give them all
Great
the
white
things.
hope.
He said, we didn't take it because we wanted their help. We took it because, we needed things, so we went ahead and took it, but we didn't feel good about it. We didn't want it the way that they treated us. We were a photo op. That's what we knew we were, right? Versus, and I don't know, we did our episode on tithing, and is tithing biblical? And the sad part with that is I don't know if that actually will come out before this episode or after this episode. So either we've already released it or it's upcoming, right? But in the episode on tithing, we actually talked about, there were 3 separate tithes in the Old Testament. Most people don't know that. So that alone will break your brain. When you talk about tithing, which one, right? But one of the tithes was the poor tithe. And the poor tithe, they were literally commanded, you bring all of the stuff that you're giving to the poor tithe, you put it in the middle of the city in a big pile, and then you leave. And the Levites and the sojourner, which is like the homeless, right? And the widows and the fatherless, which is an orphan, they come and take what they need. Mm-hmm. So we don't come for the photo op. We pile it all in the middle of the city. Mm-hmm. We set up a place where you can grab anything you need, and then we don't all stand and look with cameras and try to figure out what's going on, right? And it's let them take what they need. So even when we are giving to the poor, because giving to the poor is good and it's godly and we need to do it, there's a way to do it that gives them dignity versus when we come in, like you said, as the great white hope with our, photo ops and everything else. When you actually talk to people on the ground, so many times what we're doing is we're demeaning the very people that we say we're serving. Yeah. There's a better way to do it. And the best way to do it is to work with organizations that are already in that community and culture. Yeah. Yep. Let them, if someone's going to look good, let them look good, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a difference in missions and marketing. We do want to market, but we don't have to market all our missions. Because missions, and if you are going to market it, just tell your people in church what you did from the stage. You don't have to share stories every time. We do all that other stuff to try to convert that visitor that came in the first time or to put it on social media. What does Scripture say? When you do good, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That's very different than let us show you the slideshow from Serve Day. Yeah.
And when you're talking about that, like you're going into the inner city or the poor side of town or wherever that is in your area, and you're giving them stuff, you're taking the photo op, and then you're leaving and going back, and you're using that picture to bring in more wealthy people and say, hey, look what we're doing. You can feel good about giving to us because we go to these poor people. But you are completely forgetting about reaching the poor people because they're not going to up your bottom line. They're going to come in, if they can tithe, they're going to tithe $10. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to most churches, even smaller churches, 7,500 per church, that's nothing. So is it really worth it?
It is. Do you know why? The reason we're telling those stories and showing the slideshows and showing the video, hey, let me tell you a story. And while I'm telling you this story about what we were able to do, there's pictures and videos running behind me silently, and then you'll hear them say something along the lines of this. This is how you know it's moved into the marketing machine. And we only get to do things like this and hear about stories like this because of your faithful giving. Yeah. And every time that you give, every time you put something in the plate or your automatic withdrawal comes out, you're helping us do good in the community. like this. So church, thank you so much for your faithfulness. Thank you so much for the way that you give. I believe that every time you give, you're getting closer to well done, my good and faithful servant. Now the ushers are going to come out and to begin to pass the plate. I can do it. Do you know why I can do it? Because I was one of the people who did it. I was coached on how to do it.
If I'm ever on production team, just say, if I'm ever on a production team where that happens again, I'm going to start playing that In the Arms of the Angels and start showing pictures of puppies in the background.
You know better. There's a certain point where you're cued to start the pad.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You're cued to start the pad of the so slow, subtle music behind it where it builds up, right? And when you hear that, it really does sound good. So the reason why you market those things is because the giving units, the premium giving units, the seats out there where they give a little more, when you pull at their heartstrings, they like to know, oh, my giving is doing a lot of good. I'll give more. Yeah. And to a degree, it's okay to tell those stories. But I know of churches that have overproduced those stories, and literally every week they tell that story. They tell a story in the giving time with pictures when possible, because that's the only way we can continue to get people to give enough to get more. It's got to be a constant stream of manipulation versus just saying, what is giving supposed to be in the New Testament? Each man should give in his heart as he's determined to give, not under compulsion, generously, not under compulsion. When you start telling stories and you start saying, hey, when you get, that is a form of compulsion. Hey, don't you want to be a part of these stories? Versus getting up and saying, and I love this is what my pastor does right now. Hey, we would love it if you partnered with us in generosity, but God's just calling you to be generous. So maybe you don't feel comfortable giving to us yet. Would you pray and ask God, how does he want you to be generous this week, and who can you be generous to? And if he doesn't give you somebody now, would you just pray that God will give you eyes to see opportunities? Well, now he's not told me what to do. He's not compelled me. He's not manipulated me. He's just simply said, hey, God's calling us to be generous. And if you feel like that means partnering with our church, we'd love that, because we got bills. And we're so thankful for those of you that partner with our church, but just be generous. Give what God's calling you to give.
Yeah,
I love that.
I think a lot of it is, for pastors, when it comes to these kind of stories, it's I've been a part of churches, man, that are specifically manipulating. I mean, we've had the conversation, how can we get people to throw money at the screen, that kind of stuff. But I've also been a part of churches that will do those stories like, hey, because you give, because you're so generous as a church, we get to do these things. And then that's usually during the offering time. And I think a lot of it is comes with a good heart, like, hey, we just want to let you know what this is doing. Mm-hmm. But then it comes to the point, like there's a turning point. Like, if you're not careful, those kind of moments can turn into that that manipulation that, Arms of the Angels, puppies, ASPCA or whatever give, because of your gift, this puppy doesn't have to go hungry.
If you heard Arms of the Angels, you would know. But when we just change it to like a subtle, synthetic pad, you don't.
That's why if I'm ever on a production team, I'm going to do it. I'll get fired. I'll never be on that production team again, but it would be.
Yeah, it does. It so reminds me of those old commercials. The sickest, the closest to dead puppy ever. Yeah. This is because people aren't giving. Don't you want to save puppies,
But I think
there is a way.
A lot of pastors, that's the thing. They're not trying. I think it starts off, it can easily get to that place of manipulation. Mm-hmm. But I think there are so many that are really just telling that story because they want you to know what you've been able to do. And it's a fine line. It's something so hard.
All of it starts out well. All of it starts out with a good heart. I'm coming back to that, right? There's nothing wrong with serving and being able to tell the story. Hey, we just wanted you to know, church, this is really cool. We're not telling people outside of, this is internal marketing, right? Mm-hmm. But we just wanted to let you know, we were able to send Santa to the hospital. Here's some pictures of some kids that he was with. We didn't snap a ton because we try to do it when we could be discreet. We didn't want people to think we were after a photo op, right? Yeah. We just wanted to serve them. Or maybe you say we don't have any pictures because we didn't want people to think we were part of a photo op. But here's a picture of us with Santa before we came. We went in and just a couple of interviews of people who were there. We just wanted you to experience it. If you weren't able to be there, we wanted you to know that was a cool thing that God allowed us to do. And for everybody who was able to serve there, for everybody who gave toward that or just gives toward the work of the church in general, we're so grateful for you. Let's give God some praise and some glory for the way he allows us to love people. Move on.
Yeah.
Right? You move on. And how do you move on? Giving God praise and glory. You've never used that to then ask them, can you give more now?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's this, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I took this and I ran with it, and I said it all my ministry, and I said it, to my teams when we were planning stuff, but I also said it to my superiors, which part of the reason why I wasn't popular. Right. But it's the truth that whatever you do to get people is what you have to do to keep people.
Oh yeah.
So if what I did to get people was I marketed this big event, huge at the movies series where we gave away drinks and popcorn, and most multi-site mega churches more often than not are going to do that at some point during the year, whether it's Christmas or the summer or whatever, right? If I do that and you got all these photo opportunities and all these props and all this cool stuff and it was super produced, that's awesome. But if that's what you had to do to get new people, and I know people are going to say, but look at all the people who were saved and baptized and all that. I get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if that's what you had to do to get them, more often than not, that's the kind of thing you have to do to keep them. So if you go too many months without another slick production where they get all the things, they're going to leave your church, right?
Yeah.
So while we want people to be saved, we need people to enter into a relationship with Jesus in such a way that we know we can keep them and disciple them, right? Because even though that maybe they get saved, which is really, really good, but why they came was under a heart, that's not going to change immediately. And I know that's a struggle because there are going to be some people who say, what does it matter if they don't come back, if they don't do all this, they got saved? Well, the reason why it matters is we're not called to make converts, we're called to make disciples.
Purpose of the church.
I think though there are ways to do things like that, big events, at the movies, all that stuff. There are ways to do those kind of attractional things in a way that that's not the only reason. Like that might be the reason they walk in the door, but if you can do things during those so I mean, there are different churches. So I go to a church that they just did at the movies. And they're just starting out on their creative team journey. They don't have a whole lot of production. I mean, they've got a guy who does the films. He's great. They got some good creative people.
Like a very small team.
It's a very small team. And I volunteer with them and help them out too. But their whole service isn't a giant production of at the movies. So there are churches that their worship will be at the movies production. They'll do special musical numbers. They'll, be flying from this. They'll do all this kind of crazy stuff. And the entirety of the service is nothing but a production.
I was over the popcorn. The popcorn can never run dry.
I purchased those popcorn machines. You're welcome.
Yeah, the amount of popcorn we had to throw away because the popcorn can never run
dry. But if your entire, I think that's where the breakdown is. Your entire 4-week series is nothing but a production.
Nobody's preaching because it's all done on video like a movie.
But you can have elements of that. You can have the cool sets and people on the screens, but your worship is authentic. Or you can have like the popcorn in the lobbies, but that's just this is something that we did for you. It's the same thing as having coffee in the lobbies that weekend. It feels the same way. There are ways to do those kind of big events that when people come for those, they realize that this is not the entirety of this church. And that's how you keep them after those big events.
So when it's good marketing, you do an event like that to kind of get them in the door. You do a few special things. You make sure they have a great experience. But at the end of the day, Jesus was the center of the experience, right?
And then comes the follow-up, which is another part of marketing. And you can have people come in the door and they can get a series of email funnels, and no real interaction, just like here's some more information, and throw more and more and more at them. That's not going to be helpful. But if you have follow-up that is authentic, genuine, that is people-centric, maybe you're at a huge church that has 10,000 people and you got 15,000 visitors coming in a year. You may not have the infrastructure to have an individual call with every one of them. At that point, you might be too big.
Well, you are too big. If you don't have... So we had a person, and they were great. As sad as I get at the responses of a lot of pastors on social media, this was a church staffer, not a senior pastor, but they were great. They just said, hey, church staffer here, here's what goes on in our church, and we really do hurt when people fall through the cracks. We hurt when people leave, but there's 15 of us to 1,500 people. Like, what are we supposed to? There's just not enough of us. And I told them, so grateful for your heart. Here's something to think about, though. Yeah. If you don't have enough staff to care for and disciple the people, you don't have enough leaders, volunteers to care for and disciple the people, or to follow up with the people coming through your doors,
right?
then we've become bigger. Have we become bigger? And I was being rhetorical, but the answer is yes, we become too big. We become bigger than it's like that other thing. We're not going to start this thing and then beg for volunteers. No, if we don't have the volunteers, we're not going to start the thing because God hasn't blessed the thing yet. Right? So you have stuff like at the movies. There is a good way to do it. When it becomes the feeding the marketing machine, though, it's every year it has to get bigger and better until the gospel is just the add-on.
Yeah.
And now if you don't have that slick stuff, people aren't coming back every week. And then the problem is you get people who respond to a version of the gospel that is very watered down, not explained, added on to a movie.
Yeah.
And then what are we going to do? Because I've seen this happen, personally, but I've also heard of this happening at multiple churches. Well, at the last part of this big series and event, like at the movies, we're going to do a spontaneous baptism. And anybody who feels calls to get saved, and we're pulling all the heartstrings, we've got the synthetic pad, we're doing all the thing. And then, hey, if you've been saved or you want to give your heart to Jesus, we want to give you an opportunity to be baptized right now. Look at scriptures, with the Ethiopian. What stops me from being baptized right now? Nothing. So on the count of 3, the music is swelling. On the count of 3, if you want to be baptized, I want you to stand up right now. I want you to go. 1, the drums start swelling. 2, the other guitars start coming in. 3, the music erupts. Everybody starts clapping. People get up all over the auditorium, and there's people going, well, I want to follow Jesus. I think I'm going to get baptized if all these people are getting baptized. Or, I did pray that prayer. Maybe I'll get baptized. I don't even know what it means, but I'll get up and go with them. And then you got a pastor that's going, hey, it's not too late. Come on, keep going. And all these people are streaming out. And what you don't know is that the first 150 people who streamed out were volunteers helping with baptism.
Yep.
They were asked not to get up until they made the call.
Yep.
So now you got people going back for baptism at the end of this thing. They're not even sure if they're saved yet because they raised their hand and prayed a prayer but never talked to anybody about it. And because you've only got 3 songs to get everybody baptized or 4 songs to get everybody baptized, and there's, people on mics and production going, we've got to turn the services over, get them baptized. People are getting interviewed, and some people are getting baptized, and you really don't even know if they're saved. They get baptized, walk away. They've got information like a pamphlet about going to a small group, but they don't have someone to call on the cell phone. They don't have someone who's going to disciple them. They don't have someone following up with them. Someone who is not a part of the baptism, has never met them, might call them the next week, which is not follow up, right? That's what's going on. And sadly, a lot of times I've been in the middle of this, you're baptizing, but we got to turn the service over. We got more people coming in because we got to do 23 services today in 24 hours, so they can't be too long, right? So now the music stops everything else, and you're baptizing people in between services with, 12 people in the room.
Yeah.
And now it's this anticlimactic, I'm going through all this, but this is weird, and people are celebrating, but most people left, and we're not even singing anymore, and you asked me to do this big thing, but now there's nothing going on, and the people are telling me they're proud of me, and they gave me a pamphlet, but I don't have anybody to call about my questions about Jesus, and I'm in my car, and I'm still wondering, what does it actually mean that I'm saved? What do I do next? That's when the marketing machine has overcome the people. So let's go back to the same thing with giving. If what I had to do to get you, who were already saved, to give more, if what I had to do to get my congregation to give more was tell the heart-wrenching story and to show the heart-wrenching video and pictures, then what I have to keep doing to keep you giving more is the same thing. And the stories have to get bigger and better and more extravagant. And the pictures have to get better, and the videos have to get better, because if I don't do that, you won't keep giving at the same level, and we can't sustain the ministry that we're doing. And it becomes this, the ministry's chasing its tail because we cannot keep up with ourselves and our ministry lifestyle. Okay?
Yeah.
If we don't keep doing this. So when I say what you do to get them is what you have to do to keep them, it's one of those things of if we get people to do anything, from a baptism to raising their hand, saying they prayed a prayer, to which, when you got the, hey, anybody who prayed that prayer, raise your hand, come on, don't be scared, come on, don't, all those things, we're kind of manipulating people, right?
Yeah.
And all the way to the giving. If it started in manipulation, you will have to keep that going bigger and better, bigger and better, bigger and better, bigger and better, until the moment you can't do it bigger and better anymore. And then you either lose it all or you have to do something new and shiny and fancy they haven't seen before. And the pressure that puts on church staff members who aren't calling those shots is really, really heavy. But it worries me how many people they've given a lot, but now their giving is tied to, if I switch churches, well, I'm only giving if they can tell a good story because that's how I was taught to give.
Yeah.
Right. We haven't taught people how to be generous. So although that's not with everybody, we run the risk of getting on getting kind of on just a Ferris wheel that won't stop, a hamster wheel that won't stop of having to manipulate people if that's how we start. So the moment we cross that line, if we don't apologize, if we don't say, hey, we messed that up, then we got to stop. So I was at a church one time that did their giving was never taking up an offering. It was just like we have boxes and stuff, and we'll mention it, but we don't push very hard. And I was so proud. I was so proud because we were a big church with big budgets, and we didn't really ever talk about money, right?
Yep.
Maybe once a year we'd teach what the Bible said about money, and then we started teaching about money a little weirder, and then we started, putting like levels to stuff, and then it was, hey, pastor comes up at one point and says, hey, I haven't been faithful to you guys because we don't pass a plate and we don't talk about giving enough. You're not learning about generosity. So now we're going to start repassing the plate. Yeah. After we start repassing the plate, now we got to start telling these stories. And in a couple of years, they went from we barely talk about money and God's meeting our needs to every week the plates are passing. Every week there's a story. Every week there's music. Every week there's videos. And it's like, this doesn't feel good anymore. I'm no longer proud of my church. And now we're not relying on God to take care of our needs that people will give with just a box in the back. Now we're relying on our marketing skills and our storytelling skills to get people to give. So I think that's when it goes wrong. So everything we talked about, there's good to it.
Yeah.
When does marketing go wrong? It's when it becomes manipulative. It's when it's to get more and do more instead of saying we're faithful and believing that God will give us what we need.
It all starts in those backroom conversations. The conversations that people never see, the executive team meetings, a lot of times it starts off with vision planning. Like, hey, we want to do this year. Okay, how are we going to meet? How are we going to get to this point? We want to do this big event. We've never done it that big. It's not in our budget. How are we going to get there? And that's where it comes like, okay, this is how you get there. And then you build out these tactics. And it's one step at a time. It's never, a pastor never walks in on a Monday morning and has staff, hey, everybody, we're going to start manipulating people as hard as we can to get as much money out of them as we can.
We found a new way to grow the church. It's called manipulation. That's never happened.
Never.
Not that I know of, right? But it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And if we don't stop and say, wait a second, we did this whole vision planning meeting and we never ask, what does God want us to do?
Yeah.
Well, and again, all of this makes me really sad. Like I'm over here wanting to vomit. Truthfully. And it's because we're not treating people as people. That's the bottom line. We're not caring about the person because they're a person. We're concerned about getting people in the door because we want our numbers to go up. Well, why do we want our numbers to go up? Why do we want our numbers to go up? That is a question. And I would like to release this because if I was ever to plant a church, I think this is brilliant and people can agree with me or not. But when it comes to marketing.
Feel free to steal this idea.
Yes, please. So if people, my big thing is people need to be treated as people. And I don't
would say
find
not
that.
even people. People need to be treated in the church as more than people. They need to be treated as precious children of God.
Yeah, the people that matter, they have a heart. You see their heart. They're individuals.
We get to deliver the news that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords has chosen you to adopt.
Yeah. And so if we have an event, what if you have an event and you want, first of all, what if you want more people because you're actually sharing the gospel and people are getting saved and lives are being changed? So first thing, that needs to happen.
And if lives are being changed, people are being saved, if discipleship's not going with it.
So where's the discipleship? Yeah. So here's the discipleship piece. If for this example, you have an event. What if you have people that you have been discipling inside the church and you teach them things like, how do you strike up a conversation with a random person? How do you have small talk with a visitor, not because you're trying to manipulate them to come in the door, but because you want to engage? What if the church didn't just show up to be entertained by all of these nice events? And it's okay to have entertaining events because I think that there needs to be relationships and that happens in relationships. So you need entertaining events because of you, not to get more people in, but to serve your own community.
People who are already in.
Who are already in because you just want people to have relationships. Then you can have, and don't want to say you need, so just, but if you have events where you reach out to the community, which you should be doing, I believe, then you have people that are trained, not staff. People,
Yes.
regular people that are trained within small
saints
groups.
being equipped to do the good
saints being
works.
equipped to overcome those barriers of those conversations. Go out there, and your whole point of me going, I'm volunteering, but I'm not volunteering so I can go scoop popcorn. I'm going and volunteering so I can look for people that I don't recognize. And either they're new or I don't know them and they are already in the church. So my job, because this is who we should learn to be on a regular basis, is to go find those people and to talk to them, strike up a conversation and get to know their story, and then maybe connect them to whatever they need to be connected to, maybe exchange phone numbers if you feel led, but be personal. The reason why I stuck with, one of the reasons why I am at the church I'm at is because the children's ministry, they hand delivered a bag to my door. That meant more to me than anything in the whole wide world.
Yeah.
Because they hand delivered it. They didn't automate it on different things that businesses use.
It didn't come on like an
It
Amazon
didn't-
drone.
It wasn't just and it
would have done
wasn't
that.
it wasn't just a funnel that you were in the system, so boom 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 boom, this is what you get. It was authentic. Somebody real cared enough, even though it's just a visitor. It's what they do to all the visitors. But they showed up at my door. I didn't happen to be there, but if I was there, maybe they would have knocked on it. Maybe I could have had a conversation.
If they show up to every visitor's door, that's real follow-up.
True.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, some people say don't follow up at my door, right? But at the same time, I think that's incredible. And what we got to do with this marketing stuff, I think it just becomes this: people are the prize, because we get to deliver the good news of the gospel. Is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords wants to adopt you as his own child, right? And in that, forgive you of all your sins, cleanse you of all your mistakes, give you new hope, give you new purpose. But that, at the end of the day, the gospel means good news, and the gospel is, hey, you've got a king who wants to adopt you, and especially in such a fatherless generation.
Yeah.
That is a message that people need to hear. So anytime that message is not the main message, and anytime we start talking about people and planning as anything less than a king's kid, where every single one, even the most stressful ones and the ones that cause us the most heartburn, are of value, then we've missed it. And I do this on social media sometimes. Sometimes it's really hard to see people with that kind of value. And I have to go back and apologize. That's usually when I go back, that's at the point where it's like, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm praying for you. And then some of them get matter anyway. It is what it is, right? But I think even with the gospel and stuff like that, it can never be the add-on.